A wave of love. In the coastal village of Qua Hoi, nestled along Vietnam's central shoreline, the early morning light seeped through the palm trees and bathed the quiet hamlet in a golden glow. The sea, usually a source of livelihood and life, whispered a gentle lullaby as the waves caressed the shore. Fishing boats, weathered and worn, swayed with the rhythm of the tides, their masts creaking like old bones waking from slumber. The air was filled with the scent of salt and the distant calls of fishermen preparing for another day on the water. Ben, a seasoned fisherman with skin tanned and roughened by years of labor under the sun, stood at the doorway of his modest thatched house. His eyes, deep and knowing, reflected both the beauty of the morning and the weight of the years. At 45, Ben had spent his entire life by the sea, learning its moods, respecting its power, and trusting it to provide for his family. Beside him, his 10-year-old son, Lamb, wiped sleep from his eyes and yawned. Lamb was a small boy, his frame still slight, with eyes that sparkled with the curiosity of youth. He idolized his father, following him everywhere like a shadow, eager to learn the secrets of the ocean and the ways of the fishermen. "Come, Lamb," Ben said softly, ruffling his son's hair. "The sea is calling. We must prepare the nets." Lamb nodded, his small hand slipping into his father's rough palm. Together, they walked down the narrow path that led to the shore, their bare feet sinking into the cool sand. The village was beginning to stir, with women lighting fires and children chasing chickens through the alleyways. But Ben and Lamb paid no mind to the morning bustle. Their focus was on the sea, their bond strengthened by the rituals they performed together each day. As they reached the water's edge, Ben gazed out at the horizon, where the first rays of the sun were beginning to break through the morning mist. There was something unusual about the sea today, something that stirred a faint unease in his heart. The waves were too calm, too quiet, as if holding their breath in anticipation. But Ben pushed the thought aside. He had been fishing these waters for decades, through storms and calm alike. The sea was unpredictable, but it was also familiar. He could not let fear cloud his judgment. Not now, with so much work to be done. They worked side by side, mending the nets and preparing the boat for the day's catch. Lamb, despite his small size, was eager and quick, his hands deftly tying knots as his father had taught him. Ben watched his son with pride, marveling at how quickly the boy was growing, how soon he would become a man. He dreamed of the day when Lamb would take over the family's fishing trade, carrying on the legacy that had been passed down through generations. As the morning wore on, the villagers began to notice the strange behavior of the sea. The birds, usually noisy and abundant at this hour, were absent. The water, normally teeming with life, was eerily still. And then there was the sound, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth. It was faint at first, but soon it grew louder, more insistent, until it became impossible to ignore. Ben felt it before he heard it. A shift in the air, a tremor beneath his feet, a sense of something terrible on the horizon. He turned to look out at the sea, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The water was receding, pulling back from the shore with unnatural speed, leaving the seabed exposed and barren. And then, far out on the horizon, he saw it, a towering wall of water, rising up from the depths, gathering speed and force as it raced toward the land. "Lamb," Ben shouted, his voice thick with fear. He grabbed his son's arm, pulling him away from the water's edge. "We must go. Now." Lamb's eyes widened in terror as he saw the approaching tsunami. He had heard stories of such waves, tales told by the old men of the village, but he had never imagined he would see one with his own eyes. He clung to his father, his heart pounding in his chest. "Papa, what's happening?" Lamb cried, his voice trembling. "There's no time to explain," Ben said, his voice steady but urgent. "We must get to higher ground. Come." Without another word, Ben scooped his son into his arms and began to run, his feet pounding against the sand as he raced toward the mountain that loomed behind the village. The mountain, with its steep cliffs and dense forests, was the only place that might offer refuge from the oncoming wave. But it was far, too far, and Ben knew they had little time. The village erupted into chaos as the warning spread. Men, women, and children dropped everything and fled, their screams mingling with the roar of the approaching tsunami. Ben ran faster than he had ever run before, his lungs burning, his legs aching, but he did not stop. He could not stop. Lamb's life depended on it. As they neared the base of the mountain, Ben glanced over his shoulder and saw the wave towering above the village, its crest frothing with white foam, its shadow swallowing the land. The sight filled him with a terror unlike any he had ever known, a primal fear that gripped his heart and squeezed the breath from his lungs. But there was no time to dwell on fear. He had to save his son. They reached the mountain, and Ben began to climb, his hands and feet scrabbling for purchase on the rough rocks. Lamb clung to his father's neck, his small body trembling with fear. The wave was so close now, he could feel its cold breath on the back of his neck, hear the thunderous roar that filled the air. "Hold on, Lamb," Ben shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "Hold on tight." They climbed higher, desperate to escape the wave's reach. The trees around them swayed violently as the wind picked up, and the ground beneath them shook with the force of the approaching water. Ben's muscles screamed in protest, but he forced himself to keep going, driven by sheer willpower and the overwhelming need to protect his son. Finally, they reached a ledge halfway up the mountain, a narrow outcrop of rock that offered a precarious refuge from the onslaught below. Ben collapsed onto the ledge, pulling Lamb close to him, shielding his son with his body as the wave crashed into the base of the mountain with a deafening roar. The force of the impact shook the mountain to its core, sending rocks and debris tumbling down the slopes. The wave surged up the mountainside, reaching for them with icy fingers, but it fell short, its power spent as it receded back into the sea. For a long moment, there was only silence, broken only by the sound of Ben's ragged breathing and the distant cries of the survivors below. Ben held Lamb tightly, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind numb with shock. They were alive. Somehow, against all odds, they had survived. "Papa," Lamb whispered, his voice small and frightened. "Is it over?" Ben looked down at his son, his heart swelling with love and relief. He brushed a strand of hair from Lamb's forehead and nodded. "Yes, my son," Ben said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "It's over. We're safe now." But even as he spoke the words, Ben knew that the village below had been destroyed. The wave had taken everything: the homes, the boats, the lives of those who had not been able to escape in time. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, and tears welled up in his eyes. "We've lost so much, Lamb," Ben whispered, his voice trembling. "But we still have each other. That's what matters." Lamb buried his face in his father's chest, his small body shaking with sobs. Ben held him close, rocking him gently, offering what comfort he could. The mountain, once a place of fear, had become their sanctuary, a refuge from the devastation below. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Ben and Lamb sat huddled together on the ledge, their backs against the cold rock. They had no food, no water, no shelter, but they had each other. And in that moment, that was enough. The night was long and dark, filled with the distant cries of those who had lost everything, but Ben and Lamb held on to each other, finding strength in their bond. Ben thought of his wife, who had passed away years ago, and of how she had always been the one to soothe their fears and dry their tears. He missed her more than ever, but he knew she would be proud of them, proud of how they had survived. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Ben looked down at his son, who had fallen asleep in his arms. He brushed a tear from his own cheek and whispered a silent prayer of thanks. They had been given a second chance, a chance to rebuild, to start anew.